Do you even think you're still a part of this family? The question didn't come from my son. It didn't have to. He just stood there, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe like a silent judge. The one who threw the words in my face was Rebecca, his wife, my daughter-in-law. I was folding bath towels when I heard the bedroom door slam shut harder than usual. Then came the frantic slap of slippers against the floor. There was no fire, no crying child. Yet Rebecca marched straight into the kitchen, her eyes blazing. Her robe was half-tied, her hair a mess, the pillow's creases still imprinted on her cheek, but her mouth was already loaded and aimed. She held up a piece of paper, the kind you recognize with a single glance, an official notice from a government agency. What did you tell them? At the agency? I blinked. The agency about my husband's work, about his income. They said someone in the family reported that he was hiding income. Now we're being audited. Are you happy now? Just then Daniel, my son, emerged from the bedroom and stood right behind his wife. Shirtless, arms crossed. He said nothing. His eyes were fixed on me as if waiting for me to confess. I nodded slowly. I just told them he does odd jobs for the neighbors. Small repairs. It's not much. They asked, I answered. I hadn't even finished my sentence before Rebecca slapped the paper down on the counter. So you did say something. You ruin everything. At that exact moment, the most ridiculous thing happened. Rebecca's sister Sophia called on FaceTime. As soon as her face appeared on the screen, she was beaming like she'd just won the lottery. Did it happen? Is it finally happening? I stood frozen, the half-folded towel still in my hands. No one said anything to me. No one asked if I had done it on purpose. They didn't need an explanation. They just needed someone to blame. I turned to Daniel. You know, I would never. He avoided my gaze, not a word, not a movement. Just a slight shake of his head, as if that was enough to erase the 40 years I had been his father. Rebecca added the final blow. You need to leave. For my family. For our safety. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked toward the small room at the end of the hall. The windowless space just big enough for a single bed and a 3-drawer plastic chest. I folded each of my sweaters and stuffed them into an old duffel bag. I grabbed my pill bottle, the little bit of cash I kept hidden in a sewing tin, and the small photo album I never let anyone see. I walked past the living room. Liam, my grandson, was standing on the stairs, one earbud still in. He didn't say a word. He didn't look at me. But his eyes, vacant and confused, hurt more than his mother's shouting. I walked out the front door. No one stopped me. No one called me back. Not a single word of apology. Only the cold wind, and the duffel bag bumping against my hip with every step. I left the house that I had helped Daniel pay the mortgage on for 10 years. Not with anger, but with silence. A silence that would, in time, say everything. The room I rented was above a Korean nail salon. They didn't ask many questions, just wanted cash and a form of ID. I appreciated the anonymity, no need to explain why an old man was carrying a worn-out duffel bag and a face that had nowhere else to go. The room was barely 100 square feet. The walls were peeling, the ceiling was low, and the window only opened a crack. A thin, faded rug covered the floor, as worn as the memories of whoever lived here before me. There was an old iron bed frame that creaked like it was sighing every time I turned over. A wooden dresser tilted to one side, a hot plate sat precariously close to the outlet, and the smell of nail polish from the salon downstairs wafted up every afternoon, seeping into my clothes, into my sleep. I moved in as the sun was setting. No one to see me off, no one waiting, just my own faint reflection in the crooked mirror in the corner. I didn't bother turning on the light right away. I just stood there, taking it all in, not to inspect, but to accept. That this place, with its scent of acetone, its dim yellow light, and the long crack that snaked along the wall, was my home now. I unpacked my bag, a few sweaters, a couple of pairs of thick socks, an old handkerchief my mother had embroidered with the letter T. I put my pill bottle in the nightstand drawer. On the windowsill, I placed the only photo I'd brought with me and Liam, when he was in elementary school eating ice cream, his shirt smeared with chocolate. I was smiling. In that picture, I was still young. That night, I ate my first bowl of instant ramen in over a decade. It was too salty, but I finished it all. I sat on the bed, my back against the wall, watching some bland TV show just to have the sound of human voices in the room. There was no crying in my head, no resentment. Just silence, a kind of silence that didn't come from the outside, but from within. A silence I thought I was used to. But it turned out I had never truly known it. The next morning, I woke up at 6, just like always. Not for anyone. Just because my body had never been allowed to sleep in. I made coffee with a small machine I borrowed from the landlady. It rattled like an old car on its last legs. But the smell of coffee, weak and watery, was the only thing that reminded me I was still alive. Downstairs, the nail salon started to open. I heard the clatter of the security gate, the upbeat K-pop music, the sound of brushes being cleaned. Every sound was proof life goes on, whether someone disappears or not. I no longer had to listen to the sound of Rebecca's hairdryer. I no longer had to sidestep the slippers Daniel left in the middle of the kitchen. No one told me I was being too loud when I washed the dishes. No one told me don't touch our things. I walked the 3 blocks to the small grocery store every morning. I bought a carton of whole milk, the kind I loved, but was never allowed to buy. I bought soft rye bread, not the coarse whole wheat kind my son insisted was good for digestion. I ate a light lunch, boiled a few eggs for dinner, and watched TV without remembering any of it. No one called. I didn't call anyone. I started keeping a small journal how much I spent, what the temperature was, if anything unusual happened. I didn't write for any purpose, just to keep my mind from drifting away. Every night I'd look at the picture of Liam for a long time. He was 17 now. Quiet. He didn't hug me every day, but every morning he would give a soft tap on my door frame. He wouldn't say anything. It was just his way of letting me know I still existed. That was all. But now, I missed it. A week later, while sorting through some old clothes to donate, I found a small folded piece of paper in the pocket of one of Daniel's old jackets. It was a printed email. I unfolded it and read. The sender, Daniel himself. Sent to the agency. The subject line, clarification of income. Urgent. I read every line. There was no mistake. He was the one who had confirmed the outside income. He had proactively contacted the agency. Not me. I sat there still as a statue. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, shining directly on the paper. Below, I could hear the sounds of the salon closing for the day. But I heard nothing but the beat of my own heart. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just folded the email, tucked it inside my journal, and for the first time in weeks, I felt light. Not because the truth was revealed, but because I was no longer carrying a guilt that wasn't mine. I thought I was used to the feeling of being abandoned. At my age, it's easy to confuse respect with being forgotten. But holding that email in my hand, I understood there's a pain that comes not from being forgotten, but from being pushed off a cliff by the very person you once pulled from a pit. Sent from the email account of Daniel, my son, to the agency. The subject line was clear. Clarification of income. Urgent. The body of the email was even clearer. He confirmed he had income from side repair jobs, voluntarily disclosing it to cooperate with full transparency. I read it 3 times. By the 3rd time, the shock was gone. All I felt was my own naivete. Rebecca had screamed at me, convinced I was the one who had messed up their benefits. Daniel had stood behind her, his face a cold mask, letting me be berated like a saboteur. But now, it was clear Daniel himself had preemptively reported it to the authorities. Not to correct a mistake, but to prepare an escape route, so that if anyone found out, he could shift the blame to someone else, specifically the old man living off them in their house. Me. No one threw me out with force. They did it with calculation. A harmless comment I'd made was twisted into a confession, and I was used as a sacrificial pawn, sacrificed to preserve the image of their neat, orderly little family. I looked out the window. The weather was cold, but it wasn't raining. People on the street walked with their heads down against the wind, each with a purpose. And here I was, sitting with a piece of paper printed from an old jacket, proof that I hadn't wrecked my family. I had just accidentally spoken a truth Daniel was trying to hide. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send a text. I just got up, put on my coat, and walked to the grocery store just like any other day. For the first time in years, I didn't buy skim milk. I bought whole milk, the kind I used to love, but was told to avoid. I didn't buy the dry, coarse whole wheat bread anymore. I bought a loaf of dark rye with a crisp crust and a fragrant center, like the kind I ate in my youth. On the way back, the wind stung my eyes. But it wasn't tears. It was the sting of clarity tearing through the fog I had used to shield myself from the truth. That evening, I sat at the scratched wooden table and wrote a few lines in my journal. I didn't destroy them. I just spoke a truth they were trying to hide. And for that, they needed me gone to keep their lie intact. I folded the email and placed it between the pages of the journal, like a piece of shrapnel saved after a battle. Not for revenge, but to remind myself the one who stabs you in the back isn't always a stranger. The next morning, I opened the cupboard for the coffee. I didn't make it for anyone else, just for me. And for the first time, the coffee tasted clearer than ever. I was folding a towel when my phone rang. An unknown number, not a telemarketer. This number felt different, the kind that makes your heart skip a beat before you even answer. I picked up. "Are you Thomas Bennett? This is Officer Kelly with the 4th Precinct. We need you to come down to the station as soon as you can. It's regarding your grandson, Liam Bennett." The next words tumbled out of my mouth before I could think. What's happened to Liam? He didn't answer directly. He just said, "A missing person report has been filed. The family suspects you're involved." I sat on the number 7 bus heading downtown. I couldn't tell if I was cold from the wind seeping through my coat or from a colder intuition someone had just set a trap and I was being pushed into the center of it. Liam. The only grandchild who ever gave my door a soft tap each morning. I had no idea when he'd gone missing. I hadn't been in contact. I had been erased from that house. The police station was next to a rundown pharmacy. The glass on the door was frosted, the walls peeling. The smell of disinfectant and old printer ink mingled as if the place existed only to hear stories no one wanted to tell. Officer Kelly met me with a neutral expression, the face of a man who's heard enough lies to stop believing anything right away. He led me into a small, windowless room. On the table was a tape recorder, a file folder, and a crumpled piece of scratch paper. "When was the last time you saw Liam?" "A month ago. The day I was told to leave the house. Any contact since then? None. No texts, no calls. Do you know where he is? No. Have you picked him up from anywhere recently? I'm not allowed near their house anymore." I answered each question as if I were looking up facts about someone else's life. Not a single extra word. Though inside my mind was racing, who was behind this charade? Then he played the recording. A snippet of my own voice came through the speakers, slightly tinny. But every word was clear. As long as Liam comes back to me, I'll get everything back. I sat up straight. I remembered those words. I had said them, but not to anyone. It was when I was packing my things, talking to myself, a monologue from a man who had just lost everything. I looked at Officer Kelly. That recording is cut off. I was talking to myself. Liam wasn't even in the room. Who sent you this Sarah Bennett, the boy's mother? Just as I thought. I continued, keeping my voice steady. If you need it, I can get you the original recording. The full sentence was, as long as Liam comes back to me. I'll get back all the feelings I've lost. I just want someone who doesn't see me as a burden. He stopped writing. He looked at me, not with judgment, but not with absolution either. I'd advise you to stay in town until this is cleared up. I left the station. Outside, the wind had picked up. It wasn't raining, but the sky was so overcast that the streetlights had come on early. I saw Daniel in the waiting area, his face pale, his eyes red, his hands clenched into fists. I paused for a moment, not to say anything, just to look. And Daniel, he turned his face away. Not a greeting, not a word to defend his wife. Just a silence that had the shape of complicity. I stepped out onto the street. Every step was a commitment, not made with tears, but with a thought. When people can no longer manipulate you with emotion, they'll use the law. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I boiled water and made coffee black and strong like the calluses on my hands. I wrote in my journal, "You don't have to scream to hurt someone. Sometimes a single sentence cut, twisted, and taken out of context is enough to kill a man's name." Today, I understood why people fear silence. Because in silence, anything can be twisted into a crime. The phone rang just as I was rearranging the canned goods in my kitchen cabinet. Another unknown number. I stood motionless for a few seconds before answering. My intuition, honed by years of living with people who lie, whispered that this call wasn't coming to accuse me. On the other end was a woman's voice, gentle but not weak. "Mr. Bennett, my name is Deborah. I'm the school counselor at the high school Liam attends." I held my breath. "I'm calling to let you know that Liam has been found. He's safe. He's currently at the home of a classmate. We've informed his parents, but it seems he doesn't want to go back." I sank down onto a chair. The tension in my shoulders, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for days, began to ease. "I'm calling because Liam has mentioned you in our private counseling sessions. He doesn't say much, but when I asked him about his family, he gave me one answer. I just wish I could live with my grandpa. No one yells there. No one makes me feel guilty for just wanting to be quiet." I turned to face the window. The streetlights had just come on. Their glow diffused through the grimy glass, creating blurry shapes like a memory that hadn't quite faded. "I don't know what issues you're having with his family, Mr. Bennett, but if it's at all possible, I believe you're the only person he wants to see right now." I thanked Deborah. I didn't say anything more. But my hand, for the first time in a month, trembled not from fear, but from something that had nearly gone extinct inside me, hope. That night, I didn't make coffee. I brewed a cup of black tea, the kind I'd kept since my working days. I wrote a single line in my journal. It doesn't take many words. Just one child knowing who makes him feel at peace, that's enough for me to stop doubting myself. The next morning, I put on a thick coat and took the number 12 bus north. Through the foggy window, I saw the old school building where I used to pick Liam up during his elementary years. He was grown now. He walked on his own. But in my mind, He was still the little boy who gripped my hand to cross the street, holding on, as if letting go would make him disappear into the city. I didn't go to the school. I went to the address Deborah had given me, the friend's house where Liam was staying. It was a small white-walled house with a low wooden fence and a red maple tree out front. The door was ajar, and the scent of freshly baked cookies drifted out on the breeze. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't walk up to the door. I just stood across the street. And I saw Liam. He was sitting on the front steps, holding his phone, his shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. Not talking, not smiling. Just staring at the screen as if hiding in a place no one could find him. I didn't call his name. I didn't wave. I just stood there and waited. I remembered the counselor's words, "Don't push, let him choose." I hadn't come to take him home. I had come to let him know that if one day there was no one left in the world to trust, there was still an old man standing across the street, not demanding, not fighting, just waiting. I turned around. I walked slowly back to the bus stop. On the way home, I wrote in my journal, "A child doesn't need someone to win. He just needs to know that if he knocks, a door will open. No questions asked. No explanations needed. If Liam comes to me one day, I won't ask why. I'll just open the door." It was an overcast morning, but not cold. I decided to go to the bank not because I was worried about money, but because something had been gnawing at me since Deborah's phone call. A low, simmering intuition, as if someone was quietly moving my furniture out while I was still alive. I brought my old savings passbook, my insurance papers, and a copy of the deed to the house. The house I'd lived in for 10 years with Daniel, a house built in part with the life insurance money from my late wife. I had given them the entire sum, thinking simply, this is a home for the next generation. The bank teller was a woman with neatly tied silver hair about my age. She frowned as she looked at my file. "Have you granted power of attorney to anyone recently, sir?" I shook my head. "No. I live alone." She turned her computer screen toward me. A line of red text was stark against the white background. "Competency hearing request pending. Initiated by Sarah Bennett." I didn't flinch. I didn't curse. I gave a small, dry chuckle, the kind an old man gives when he discovers someone thinks he's senile, forgetting that he was the one who signed all the original documents. I asked, "Can they do that?" "If I haven't signed anything," she replied. "If there's a claim that the owner is no longer mentally sound, a family member can petition to have the assets temporarily frozen." I left the bank with a newly clipped file in my hand, feeling as if I were holding my own eviction notice from the life I had built. Back in my room, I dug out my insurance policy. The name listed as the contingent beneficiary was Sarah Bennett. I couldn't remember why. Maybe when I filled out the form, I thought simply she's Daniel's wife. She'll take care of Liam if something happens to me. I once believed Sarah was a decent person. I sat down. I opened my journal. I wrote quickly. This wasn't a new plan. They were doing this while I was peeling potatoes, mopping floors, and washing towels for their child. Every document I left behind. They carefully collected and repurposed, changing my role from father to a name to be removed. That night, I didn't eat. I wasn't hungry. I just sat there looking at the bank file and the insurance policy's silent proof that I'd given everything away, and in return was facing removal from my own life. The next morning, I went to a lawyer's office near the community center. Her name was Marissa, a woman in her 40s with a short, no-nonsense haircut, who spoke little but said much. I told her everything, holding nothing back, including the part about how I used to think that if you were kind, people wouldn't betray you. When I got to the part about the insurance and the house, Marissa looked up. "They haven't officially filed to have you declared incompetent. But if you don't get ahead of this, they can do it at any time." I nodded. Not afraid? Just resolved. Then let's get ahead of it. She gave a small smile. Not of pity, not of a professional indulging an old man. It was the look of someone on my side. We agreed on a plan file for a voluntary competency evaluation with an independent doctor. Simultaneously, send a request to freeze all transfers of property and insurance policies and pull the entire history of beneficiary changes. On the way home, a strong gust of wind blew a receipt from my hand. I bent down to pick it up. Not because I cared about the piece of paper, but because I was done losing anything else, even the smallest detail. That night I wrote, "I'm not reacting out of anger. I'm fighting back with the truth. And this time, I'm keeping my name on every piece of paper they want to erase." I returned to Marissa's office on Monday morning. The air wasn't cold, but I kept my hands deep in my coat pockets, not because of the wind, but because I knew from here on out, nothing would follow the old path. Marissa sat behind her wooden desk, my file now nearly twice as thick. She wasted no time on pleasantries. She worked like someone who had seen plenty of families fall apart, but rarely saw an old man fight his way back after being erased. I gave her the original unedited recording the sentence Sarah had clipped to report me for luring a minor. The full sentence was, "I don't know if I'm even considered family anymore. But if that boy needs a place to land, my door is always open. I don't want to get anything back. I just want someone who doesn't see me as a burden." Marissa listened, then gave a sharp nod. "Good. We have the original evidence." I continued handing her old text messages from Sarah sent over a year ago. In them she had written clearly, "If you know what's good for you, you'll sign the house over to us so we can build a nest for the next generation." Cold, clean, undeniable. Finally, I placed the letter from the school counselor Deborah on the desk. It included the line Liam has stated to me on multiple occasions that he wishes to live with his grandfather. He reports feeling stressed, pressured, and emotionally unsafe at home. Marissa arranged each piece of evidence neatly. Each paper was a slice of the truth. No need to pull a knife. Just let people see for themselves. This situation, she said, is a classic case of pushing an elderly person into a dark corner and hoping they won't fight back. But you fought back, and you have facts. They haven't sued you yet, which means they're waiting for you to make a mistake. I looked her straight in the eye. I have nothing left to lose by making a mistake. Marissa smiled, half believing, half wary. Then it's time. We go on the offensive. She proposed a plan file for temporary guardianship of Liam based on his psychological record and his own stated wishes. Send a formal cease and desist letter to Sarah and Daniel, demanding they stop all threats and slander and provide their original copy of the recording to our side. Schedule the independent competency evaluation as a preemptive defense against any attempt to have me declared incompetent. Send official notice to the bank and insurance company to freeze the assets, preventing any changes during the dispute. Before I left, I looked at my file, not to check it, but to remember. Every piece of paper I once thought was a triviality had now become a legal weapon. That night, I made coffee. Strong, black. I opened my journal and wrote just 2 lines. I don't need to shout to reclaim my dignity. I just need to sign in the right places and stand firm while others falter. I was washing my hands when I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a frantic knock. It was controlled 3 even raps, just loud enough to disturb someone trying to find peace. I dried my hands. I opened the door. Sarah and Daniel stood before me. Sarah wore a long beige coat, her hair in a high bun, her lips painted red. Her face was set as if she were attending a press conference. Daniel stood behind her, hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the floor tiles like a schoolboy forced to apologize. I stood my ground. I didn't invite them in. I didn't move aside. I just leaned against the frame enough to let them know if you have something to say, say it here on the threshold. Sarah spoke first, her voice as smooth as honey. Thomas, your grandson Liam is very sick. He's not eating, not sleeping, coughing all night. He needs his mother. And he needs you. I didn't react right away. I just looked at Daniel. His eyes were red. Maybe from lack of sleep. Maybe from having to think for himself for the first time. I asked curtly, "And so you came here to—" Daniel mumbled, "We're not here to take him. It's just, Liam needs you. He needs someone familiar." I knew Sarah. She never spoke kindly unless she had an agenda. I looked her straight in the eye. "Did Liam say he wanted to see me?" Sarah's lips tightened. Then she answered, still sweet, "He's just a boy. He doesn't know what's best for him. But if you try to keep him well, we could consider filing charges for luring a minor. It could be seen as kidnapping." The words dropped like bait. But I didn't bite. I smiled faintly, a toothless smile. But it was enough to send a chill down her spine. "I didn't lure anyone. My grandson came here, because he knows where he'll be respected." Sarah took a step forward, her tone shifting. "You are not his legal guardian. If you don't hand him over, we will sue." I didn't back down. I opened the door wider. I pointed down the hall. "Then go ahead and sue. But for now, I'm asking you to leave my home. This isn't a stage for your family drama." Daniel started to say something, but he was too late. Sarah had already spun on her heel. Her eyes were cold, her lips pressed into a thin line. As they walked down the stairs, Daniel glanced back. He looked at me. For just a second. I didn't nod. I didn't wish him luck. I just watched him, as the man who had watched him be born, learn to walk and now stand with the person who wanted to erase me from existence. I closed the door. I locked it twice. Not out of fear, but because I knew I had just watched them lose control. I poured a glass of cold water. I drank it slowly. My hand didn't shake. I opened my journal. I wrote just 3 lines. They didn't come because they were worried about Liam. They came because they felt their power slipping. They forgot I no longer need to be kept. I'm the one who gets the last knock, and I've already rebuilt my own door. The county courthouse was at the end of the street next to a gas station and a bakery that had closed for the summer. The courtroom wasn't large, no vaulted ceilings like in the movies, no one filming. The old wooden benches creaked, and the smell of old paper and stale coffee hung in the air, as if justice here was dispensed by hand, slowly, but with enough weight to matter. I wore my old gray suit, my leather shoes scuffed at the heel. No tie, no fancy belt buckle. I didn't come to make an impression. I came to reclaim what should never have been taken. Marissa, my lawyer, sat beside me, her hair tied back, her expression like stone. She didn't need to say much. Our file spoke for itself. Sarah came alone. No Daniel. She wore a dark red suit, her hair straightened, her heels high. She carried a thick red folder. But inside, it was all performance. The hearing began. Marissa's presentation was brief, clear, sharp as a scalpel. I was forced from the home, denied access to Liam, but remained his legal grandfather. She presented the clipped recording Sarah sent to the police, contrasted with the full original I provided. She produced the old text messages from Sarah herself, demanding I sign over the house to build a nest for the next generation. She submitted the letter from the school counselor confirming Liam's voluntary statements about wanting to live with me and feeling emotionally unsafe at home. Sarah reacted as expected. Tears. A trembling voice. Her words were soaked in fear, emotional distress, and accusations of an unstable old man. The judge, a woman with salt and pepper hair and black-rimmed glasses, didn't frown or nod. She just asked one question. Do you have any medical documents proving Mr. Bennett is incapable of caring for a minor? Sarah was speechless. No. Any reports from a psychologist? No. Any formal complaints from a state agency? Also, no, nothing. Then the judge turned to me. Mr. Bennett, do you have anything you'd like to say? I stood up. I held no papers. I looked at no one but her. I didn't come here to fight over a child. I came here because I don't want my grandson to think he only has one way home. I didn't teach him to take sides. I just want him to be able to live without being afraid that he too will be thrown out just like I was. I don't need to be a hero. I just need to be there when he needs me. The courtroom was silent. Not even a chair creaked. The judge nodded. She wrote a few lines. Then she looked up, her voice as calm as someone reading a weather report. The court grants the request for temporary guardianship. Mr. Thomas Bennett will be the primary guardian of Liam Bennett for a period of 90 days, effective today. I don't remember how I walked out of there. I only remember the sunlight hitting my face, making me squint. And when I opened my eyes, I saw Liam. He was standing at the end of the hallway, not in a hoodie. He wore a white button-down shirt and jeans. He was thinner, but he stood tall. His eyes were red, not from crying, but from the relief of knowing he hadn't been left behind. He walked over. He hugged me, not tight, not for show, just close enough for me to hear him whisper in my ear, "You're the only place I feel safe." I didn't say I love you or everything will be okay. I just whispered back one thing I know. It was enough. That night I wrote in my journal, justice isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's when a real person speaks the truth and remains standing even when the whole room is silent. The morning after the hearing, I woke up at 5:45 like always. It wasn't out of habit anymore. It was because today, I wasn't waking up alone. Liam was asleep in the corner of the room, curled up on a makeshift bed of cushions from the wooden chairs, his old hoodie folded neatly under his head. He didn't snore, but his breathing had the sound of exhaustion, the exhaustion of a child who had been holding himself together for too long. I made coffee and then a pot of tea. The small hot plate warmed the room. No one talked about winning custody. No one asked who was right or wrong. We just ate breakfast, rye bread and boiled eggs. I poured him some tea, and he held the mug with both hands. After breakfast, Liam sat quietly at the table. Then he took a pen from my old tin box and wrote on a piece of paper. I didn't read it. I just saw him fold it, place it on the table, and tuck it under his water glass. "Grandpa, I think I need to go back to the house. Not because I want to, but because there are things I need to say." I nodded. I didn't ask questions. "But if I can't find my footing there, can I come back here?" I looked at him the way an old man looks at a grandson who doesn't have to pretend to be strong in front of him. "You don't have to knock. You have a key." He smiled a small, tired smile. His eyes were still red, but they were no longer afraid. He left that afternoon. No hug, no promises. He just turned at the door and said, "I don't know where I belong. But at least, at your place I don't feel like a burden." That evening I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat by the window, writing in my journal, "I no longer need anyone's forgiveness. I don't need to hear an apology. I don't demand that they admit they were wrong. Because I don't live for their validation. I live so I don't erase myself." I closed the journal, turned off the lamp, poured another cup of tea. The room was filled only with the sound of the wind in the window frame. But I knew if one day Liam came back amid all the uncertainty out there, Here there would still be a warm yellow light, a place to sit, and an old man who had learned to live without anyone's approval, but who still left the door open. People think old age is weakness, but sometimes it just means you no longer have to scream to be heard. You just have to be there, unwavering, unmoved, and let the truth do the rest. Thomas Bennett, 68 years old. Not perfect, not weak,